Hello, everyone, and welcome to our developmental psychology unit. We are studying development across the lifespan, and today we're starting with 3.1 and 3.2a. So, prenatal development and physical development, and the three themes that are studied in developmental psychology. Here are your learning objectives, here are your vocab. So, what is developmental psychology? Developmental psychology is the study of physical, cognitive, and social changes throughout our lifespan. And there are three major themes that we look at. The first is nature and nurture. The second is continuity and stages. And the third is stability and change. So what do those mean? Well, nature and nurture you've probably learned before this module. That is nature, our genetics, and nurture, our environment. And so our genes predispose us. They give us this map, right? And experience shapes, let's say, what parts of the map we use heavily, how we use them, how we experience them. So we are biopsychosocial beings, right? We are an interaction of nature and nurture. So one of the things we do in developmental studies is look at certain things and look at, does this tend to be nature? Does this tend to be no matter who you are, your genes kind of do X, Y, Z in a certain way? Or is it environmental things? Do those play a role? And if so, what kind of role? The next theme is continuity and stages. So continuity just means like constant flow. So take something like learning a language, right? Is it a continuous flow of things or cognitive development, the way we think? Is it continuous, just a constant flow as you each day get older? Or are there stages where certain things tend to happen and change in our cognitive development? So we will be looking at Erik Erikson for psychosocial stages and Jean Piaget for cognitive stages as some examples. So there are stage theories. These things happen at certain ages, or the opposite idea that there is just a continuous flow. And, a little bit of both is really true, just like nature and nurture. And the last one, stability and change. Are there things that stay stable over our lifespan? So one thing, for example, that tends to stay stable over our lifespan is our temperament. And this is our emotional reactivity. So if we are emotionally reactive babies, we are temperamentally intense, right? As babies, we tend to be that way as adults. We can learn how to kind of manage those feelings, right? We don't have to act in certain ways, but your temperament tends to be stable. So looking at things like that, for example, and seeing what things change and what things can be more stable. So less stable, for example, are our social attitudes. As we age, those tend to change. Okay, so how do we study these things? There are two types of studies that you should know. The first are cross-sectional studies. A cross-sectional study is going to compare people of different ages at the same point in time. So February 12th, 2026, you're going to take the 10-year-old, the 15-year-old, the 20-year-old, the 30, etc. And they're all going to show up and you're going to all collect the data over that specific time period of those couple of days, right? That's cross-sectional. You have this broad age group and it's all done in one time. Maybe it takes a week or something, but it's all kind of at once. Longitudinal is we're going to take two groups, let's say. We're going to take a group who goes to preschool early and a group that doesn't go to preschool early, and we're going to follow them for a long period of time, longitudinal, the same group of kids. So we're going to study them in February 10th, 2026, but then we're going to look at them in 2030, in 2035, in 2040. The kids that went to preschool earlier, are there any advantages that we see throughout their lifespan when they're a teenager, when they're in college, when they're an adult in a job, like in their 40s? Longitudinal studies can go on for decades and it really just builds up the research. So it's a great way to find things out. It can just be very challenging, right? And people can fall out of studies or pass away. And so it can become difficult to do. Okay, so those were our three themes. So let's talk about prenatal development. So we're starting in the womb. Or actually we're starting before we exist right here. We're talking about the woman's body releasing an the woman's ovaries release an egg. Okay, so when a woman ovulates, she releases an egg. And interesting fact, women are born with all their eggs. So when they're born, right? So basically like in utero when they were a baby, right? They had all of their eggs. And only 1 in 5,000 is going to actually mature and be released. But they are born with all their eggs. Men, that is not true. Men begin producing sperm at puberty. So in the beginning of the puberty, that is a lot, and it slows down with age. 200 million sperm are going to race to the egg, but only 1 is going to fertilize the egg. Now, there are 2 different types of twins, and this would be useful to know. So there are fraternal twins. So this is if the ovaries release 2 eggs. So 2 eggs are released and 2 sperm meet it. So 1 egg, 1 sperm here, 1 egg, 1 sperm here. These 2 siblings, twins, are just as much alike as any other biologically related twins. I'm sorry. They're just as much alike as any biologically related siblings. Okay? So fraternal twins, their genetic similarities are just as much as any siblings. The difference is that they happen to share the womb together. Identical twins are identical DNA because it's the same egg and the same sperm, and then it splits. So babies at that fertilization are called zygotes. And this is that first 13 days where this one cell, starting off as one cell, just starts multiplying, dividing into more, right? And about 10 days after conception, it's going to attach to the uterine lining. And about 2 weeks in, the baby is now no longer a zygote. It is now called an embryo. And this is also the time when the placenta is developed. This is going to filter out any teratogens, any harmful things. It's also going to supply oxygen. During the embryonic stage is when the heart begins to beat. And this is also where that splitting can happen to become twins. After 9 weeks, or from 9 weeks on, the baby is known as a fetus. And in 6 months, this is when important development of organs happens, so that if the baby was born prematurely, 6 months and longer, the longer the better, the baby has a good chance of survival. So at birth, what are newborn babies able to do? So they can recognize their biological mother's voice. They can hear in the womb. They prefer hearing the mother's language, the language that they've constantly heard all of that time that they were in the womb. That placenta, it can filter out certain teratogens, but some teratogens, some things that are harmful to the baby, that's a teratogen, cannot be filtered out as well. So some things, especially if there's high exposure to something like alcohol, can develop fetal alcohol syndrome, and this can have all sorts of complications. And alcohol also has an epigenetic effect. So it doesn't just cause like a birth defect or hyperactivity. It literally can chemically alter. It can alter the DNA to switch some things on or off in an abnormal way because of that exposure to that harmful agent. So what can a baby do at birth? So babies are born with 4 reflexes that you should know. The first is rooting. This is when if you touch a newborn's cheek, they turn their head towards the side of the cheek that you're touching and they open their mouth. This is a reflex to look for food. Sucking, also essential for food for babies, right? So babies that are born premature, there are all sorts of speech therapy and physical therapies that they can do to help teach baby that sequence of tongue, swallowing, and breathing, because that's essential to life. The next one is the Moro reflex. They hold the baby a little bit up like this. This would be like a preemie check. They likely don't do this on a fully developed child. And then they just like kind of like let their hand go and like let it drop back. Like it's a very small little, just a slight little drop into their hand, right? And nothing harmful at all. And the point is, does the baby, and you can see in this picture, does the baby raise its hand and kind of do this like, right? That's the startle reflex. It's also known as the Moro reflex. And the last one is grasping. If you touch a baby's palm, they will grasp. If you touch a baby's bottom of their foot, they will also grasp, but they'll probably like that a lot less. So those are things to help them at birth. Another way, so one way that we look at what babies, how do we know what newborn babies know, right? How do we know what they already expect to see, what's novel to them, that they prefer their mother's language, right? How do we know these things? So one way that they test this is habituation. And this is a decrease in response to a repeated stimulation. So basically, like, I've seen this show before. This is old news. It's not exciting. But look over there, something novel, something I've never seen before, and it piques their interest. So what they pay attention to, if they stare longer, then it has piqued their attention. It's something they don't fully understand, or they're trying to figure out. So when we give them novel stimuli, their attention, they show boredom with the expected ones. So how do we study, when we look at physical growth, we look at how a baby matures, so maturation. So this is their biological expectations of what should a baby be able to do, newborn, what should be able to do at 4 weeks old, 8 weeks old, 12 weeks old, etc. And typically, no matter how you're parenting, these things are going to develop at a certain rate, no matter what's going on, right? They're relatively uninfluenced by nurture. However, if there is some sort of severe deprivation or abuse, adverse childhood experience, then it can delay these things. But humans are generally very resilient. So they can pick up and catch up if they've fallen behind. But there are certain things that no matter what environment we're in, we tend to do one thing before the other. For example, we tend to use nouns before we use adjectives. And then how this goes with our brain growth is that when we're born, we have a certain amount of neurons and synaptic connections, and that starts to increase especially when we're like 2 years old. But even by the age of 10, we're already starting to see that pruning process where it's the use it or lose it. Like the synaptic connections that weren't being used start to fade away. And so this is both that genetics and that environment playing a role. Oops. Okay, so what are some physical development stages? So that maturation, what are some things? We can look at fine motor skills and we can look at gross motor. Fine motor, think about like the ability to hold a pencil and correctly and write. So those are like small muscle skills. Gross motor skills would be more like your large muscle skills, like riding a bike, for example, walking, running. And then when we're studying all of these things, and here's some more examples over here of things that babies should be able to do at certain ages, we also look for, is there a critical period? Is there a period in which it is best for a baby to do a certain thing? And a critical period says, if they don't do it then, the window closes and they won't be able to do that thing. If they don't learn a language by this time, the window closes, it's done, you can't learn it, right? Whereas the term sensitive period is not a hard closed window. It's more like there's an optimal time for learning this thing. Here are just some examples of fine motor skills. You don't have to write down the gross motor skills or the fine motor skills. I just put these out if you're interested. So what about when we look at the development of the different parts of the brain? So when we look at the hippocampus does not fully develop until about age 3.5. This means, since the hippocampus helps us form new memories, that episodic memories, those personal memories to you, like going to Disney World or going to get ice cream with dad, right? These experiences you're not going to remember if they're in those early ages. You are going to remember how to walk, how to talk, you're going to remember words, right? Those are all implicit memories and they go through different parts of the brain. For example, you know that balance, coordination, and body movements uses the cerebellum. So it's that hippocampus for those episodic memories that isn't fully developed. All right, so our takeaways. Remember, there are 3 major themes in developmental psych: nature and nurture, continuity and stages, stability and change. Your temperament is something, for example, that tends to be more stable. You go from being a zygote, a single fertilized egg, to an embryo, to a fetus, and at birth, you have certain reflexes. There are 4 reflexes to know, and the maturation that applies to both gross motor and fine motor skills. And that typically happens no matter who we are and how we're parented, unless we're talking about extreme adverse childhood experiences. That sums up 3.1 and 3.2a, and I will see you in class.